the most effective way to drive sales is probably not going to be the most effective way to drive brand. Now that feels like, well, I'll always do the most effective thing to drive sales as an early stage startup, but hey fucker, pay attention to this ad or the puppy dies is probably going to hurt your brand and would be really effective at driving short-term attention as a piece of copy. So naturally, you are already making decisions to preserve elements of your brand from the moment that you decide not to do things like that. And I think there are inherently going to be borders and kind of barriers to these things to make a longer term investment in a company that you inherently make, even if it doesn't feel like you're doing it. So you're building brand in everything you do. And I think, that should be acknowledged.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we answer your burning questions, cut through the BS, and tell you what you need to know about the world of marketing to grow your brand, business, and career. Welcome to another edition of Punchy. On today's episode, we have Green Point's answer to Dr. Byron Sharp, Dr. Dubose Cole, joining us from Brooklyn. Jenna, who will not be leaving her new apartment in Hampstead until somebody drags her kicking and screaming onto an airplane for her next business trip. And then we have our new friend, Joe Glover, co-founder of the Marketing Meetup, which is, in his own words on LinkedIn, a really, really nice place for the marketers of the world to come together, listen, learn, meet, and share knowledge. I love it. Joe, in particular to you, because these two have to put up with me day in and day out, is what they get paid for. Thank you for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's very lovely. Very exciting to be here.
All right. So you got the whole run of show. We worked out all of the technical kinks in the pre-production. Let's get into it. We got 4 questions from our community to answer today, starting with the one that you highlighted, Joe. So we're going to get your answer first. And the question is, what is the biggest skill gap in marketing currently? And will AI be able to bridge any of these gaps?
Yeah, I love this question. And the reason why I love it is I think that it speaks to something that we tend to over-focus on as marketers. The easy answer would be, PPC or AI or social media. I think the biggest skill gap that sort of sits within human beings right now as marketers is not necessarily competence as much as it is confidence, which means to say that I think a lot of us will walk into a meeting and have this idea as a marketer that we're somehow less than, that we need to justify. I don't know any other job title which feels the need to justify our existence and our activities quite as often as we do. I don't know any other profession where we have to say, prove it all the time. You wouldn't say to your accountant, prove that what you've said is right. You would just trust your accountant. And I think the same stands true for marketers. And so right now, rather than a skill gap, I think it's a confidence gap that exists. When the second half of the question comes in about AI, I don't think that's something that AI can replace. In fact, I think it's something that AI does incredibly well, is that it is very confident in itself. And something that I think as humans, we have the option to work hard on, recognize, and say, with a bit more confidence one way or another, then we can be so much better at our jobs as marketers, both in terms of believability, but also deliverability.
I'd be curious in the community that you've built with the Marketing Meetup and the conversations that are happening there. I think for sure confidence is a big part of filling any skill gap. The conversations around AI, ChatGPT specifically, what are you seeing in terms of reactions and recommendations from marketers out there for how they can close the gap with understanding that technology specifically? Because I think there's still a lot. Well, there's many ways that it's impacting our job as marketers, opportunities and challenges, but there's so much more to come. And so one of the things that we say is just getting your hands dirty, tasting it, playing around with it is really helpful, even if you don't know how it's going to impact your job or career quite yet. But what are you seeing in terms of what people are doing well, resources they're finding? Anything more you can share from, I'm sure, tons of insight that you have with all the marketers you speak to about what people are doing that are kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to AI as a new skill set specifically?
I think, the lovely thing about AI is that what at the end of December, it was launched into our world and really catapulted in a way which was just mad. You know, I don't think anyone was expecting it quite in the same way. Google wasn't, you know, frankly. So if Google wasn't, then it's fair to say the marketer on the street wasn't. Which I think speaks to a lovely thing, which is that right now we're in a space where all of us can be learning and growing and figuring this stuff out together. You can see some certain people. I think of Kieran Flanagan, who's the CMO of Zapier, who is like a terrific source of learning on AI. And there's a bunch of these folks out there. I mean, every person has seen 1,000 templates carousels on LinkedIn right now with the top 100 prompts that you can give ChatGPT. I think that's largely sort of trickery and sort of short-term sort of attention grabbing. But I think listening to people who have like serious sort of chops in the game is probably where you need to be going. You pointed out the other one there, which is, you know, sort of getting your hands dirty. I think that's really important. The last is, if you go into stuff like Midjourney, I think it's just wonderful because you can go in and see the prompts that other people are giving. So you got the opportunity to see the output that people are gaining and sort of like try it for yourself. So again, that sort of speaks to number 2, but I think it's really important. The last thing I think I can add is that there's 2 emotional reactions that I'm seeing to AI right now. The first is fear, and then the second is let's use it as a companion. I think the first one is completely reasonable and logical because right now, you know, folks are like, holy crap, you know, like if I was a copywriter, I'd be like, yeah, you know, there's quite a lot of words being written right now and quite a lot of them can be done by AI. That's a little bit terrifying. And I think that's fair enough. I think the place where people are getting to slowly is this slightly more, okay, let's augment what we do. Let's see how we can change it over the course of time, rather than necessarily focusing on the being replaced for the meantime. I think right now the replacement argument isn't where the tech is at. It could be in a few years for sure, but presently we're selling ourselves short if we think that it's our equal just yet.
Dubose, what about from your perspective on the AI piece, but also the biggest skill gap currently in marketing?
I think I agree with Joe in a lot of points on the kind of the biggest skill gap is a mentality thing. But I would argue it's a slightly different mentality. I think one of the problems with marketing as a whole is we tend to reinvent the wheel. Like I think it's interesting that, you know, if other fields act as if marketing did, we would ignore everything that hasn't occurred in the last 5 years and then try to reinvent everything. Your doctor would only have studied surgeries and techniques probably from the last 3 years and the things we're excited about in the next year versus kind of a strong basis of things that work fundamentally across time. So I think, you know, the skill gap in advertising and marketing is always going to exist until there's an understanding that we can build a collective knowledge base that makes us stronger, smarter, better. I think, you know, one of the things I find about marketing is it fetishizes new things. It kind of goes, everything will change when this is shown up. Like if it wasn't NFTs and crypto, it's AI. It's back to the idea, everything we knew before can go away now. Thank God. That was a big burden. Now we can just try new, exciting things. And I think, you know, the interesting thing here is things don't change. I think at the end of the day, we could understand more about what's worked 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago of an equal validity. But I think, you know, until the industry stops chasing novelty in kind of a space instead of effectiveness, I think we're always going to have a skill gap. I think AI is interesting because at least things change faster. So at a certain point, maybe the dog will never catch the car now, and we'll have to turn around and actually kind of deal with the knowledge base of things we have and organizing those. And I think the other interesting thing is it's going to force us to do more than lip service with data. Because at the end of the day, most agencies, most marketers, when they say they deal with data, they deal with a badly formatted spreadsheet. So I think having to put data in a way that it's structured and available and useful, both for an AI tool, but for our peers in the marketing industry, is probably an interesting step towards actually creating more of a consolidated user base and a consolidated knowledge base. Because I think that's when you're going to get people being able to stand on the shoulders of other marketers as opposed to kind of going in their own direction. I think it's someone once said that good marketers are kind of like waiters. We kind of serve the consumer, and then even within the marketing comms industry, there's the idea that, you know, you're kind of serving the client. I think there's an interesting thing that as you start to build up more of a consolidated knowledge base, you probably become something much sexier, like a plumber, to that point of people trusting you. People will naturally trust you that you'll do a good job when you can prove that you've done a good job before in a replicatable manner, as opposed to a manner that's based on charisma or certain kind of sets of conditions.
All right, let's keep moving on to question number 2, which Jenna is going to field. The listener asked, I'm a scale-up founder of a CPG brand, and I'm hearing more about using TV ads in our marketing mix. This seems like an outdated strategy, or should I consider it? Jenna?
I really like this question because it does give me an opportunity to rant about a different trend that I'm seeing in all the ads that I get served on like Instagram and everywhere. I've definitely noticed, and because I have obviously manipulated my Instagram and all my other algorithms into just showing me ads from other agencies because I'm fascinated by these things. And like, I've noticed that like the big trend in like performance, like marketing shops is increasingly like, hey, we helped all these like D2C brands. I actually can't remember the name of the agencies, but whoever it was that did like, Dr. Squatch, and like a bunch of like the big, like, kind of like, the D2C darlings of kind of like the last like 10 years, they've come in and like really aggressively like pitched and positioned themselves around. We have this system where we like create like your core videos for like your meta like platforms. We spin these out into a bunch of different creative variations, and we've helped all these D2C brands scale their Facebook ads from like 2 million in sales to 5 million in sales, or from 20 million in sales to like 100 million in sales. We've run $100 million worth of ads like on Facebook and Instagram and all the other things. And this really seems to be like the big explosion, which makes a lot of sense given the last like 10 years of like what, CPG and like D2C like brands like do. And I think it's going to be a really interesting transition now that capital is no longer cheap, and that the order of the day for CPG companies is not going to be this weird fever dream that we had of like, we'll pay any cost to like acquire a customer, like however inefficiently we want, as long as we're growing top line revenue. We're like, now we see like all these D2C companies that were built on that sort of like churn and burn Instagram, like Facebook model have gone public and are not doing super well. And I do think, like, to DuBose's earlier point, yes, like there is absolutely going to be a return to television is an effective channel. It is a really good broad reach medium. There was definitely a point in time where like the relative price of television CPMs like versus what you could achieve on like Facebook and Instagram was really like, disfavorable for television. But this has absolutely changed. Like CTV, even though there's like a really big problem with fraud and a couple of like, CTV placements, like I think the minimum spend on Hulu now, like Hulu, like for their like ad subscription service, is like $250 a month. Like it's very accessible now. It's like relatively cheap. Like television and like other channels are absolutely like now I think coming back to a point where it's highly competitive on a price perspective from what, we see on Facebook and Instagram that are seeing really rising costs. And to DuBose's point, television was the dominant medium that like, CPG brands built themselves on for decades for like a lot of reasons. It wasn't just that television was the only thing that was available. Like, we still see, didn't we do research on like, actually television is still like one of the mediums that really gives brands serious, like accreditation simply for, the medium is the message, like the placements on TV. I think television is absolutely a place that like, it's, right? Like you still get that like sort of like burst of credibility from being in those placements. Like I say, it gets a little complicated between, which CTV placements and kind of other providers that you want. But it's so funny to me that like television is seen as like this old fashioned thing because like that dominant model for so long was that churn and burn performance on Facebook. And now every agency is doing it right around the time when I think the wind is definitely about to come out of those sails. So 2 thumbs up on TV.
All right. 2 thumbs up on TV. Joe, I'd love to get your perspective on this. Are you 2 thumbs up on TV for a CPG scale-up brand?
I think there's a broad principle here, which is the more that you can be seen, the better. And I love Jenna's point there about, there's a legitimacy that comes from TV. I think that's true. There are a number of brands, and of course, when you come to try and remember them now, top of mind, but that sort of come to mind as challenger brands that are coming up that advertise on football channels all the time, every weekend. And like, there is just something about that which sort of breeds that recognition that when you see a social ad, when you see them online through display or whatever, that is reinforcing, that is useful. And so I really think this idea of being on TV, or indeed any channel, if we were to broaden it out, frankly, sending direct mail, carrier pigeon, it doesn't really matter. The thing that matters is that like you're getting in front of your customers via a way which is going to get their attention one way or another. I think the idea that a channel is quote unquote dead is a fallacy almost always. If it's going to be getting attention in a meaningful way, that's what we're trying to do as marketers. And like whether it's new, old, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're getting attention in the right way and moving customers to eventually buy, should they want to, and be the right person for it.
I hear that the CPMs on carrier pigeons are crazy. You heard it here first. Something to look into. All right. Moving on. Question number 3. In the early stages of a startup, how do you balance the need for short-term growth and customer acquisition with long-term brand building and customer retention? What strategies do you employ to achieve both objectives simultaneously? Dubose.
So I think on a question like this, and we get questions like this often, I think there are obviously a few realities to early stage startups. You've got to keep the lights on and you've got to sell things. But I think one of the ways to think about brand versus performance or brand versus sales is to just blow up that dichotomy completely. I think it's interesting in the construct of the question that you got short-term sales, long-term brand building, and retention. It almost frames that brand can't help acquire. I think one of the ways I tend to think about brand versus sales is the idea that brand is an investment in longer term sales or the ability of people to consider buying you. It's back to that idea that you're growing the addressable and potential audience and you're starting to expand the scale of your business. Obviously, short-term, more performance-based communications are there to sweep that through, get people who are already in market, start to reap kind of what you've sown. I think, there's quite a few models on this. Twitter's Tom Roach has quite a nice one that tries to blow up kind of the traditional consumer journey and talks instead about kind of encouraging, nudging. It's a series of actions that feel very handsy, but all of them speak to the idea of, really cashing in different levels of engagement that you're fostering with consumers. And I think that's probably a good way to think about this if you're an early stage startup. Obviously, you're going to have an addressable audience that you thought was your product market fit. Go out and get those people. Use comms that have a smaller behavioral fuse to do so. But beyond kind of the low-hanging fruit or those that excited you to go into the market, you're going to need to start growing that audience. I think when people talk about brand, it seems fluffy. There's the idea of, we've invested in the brand and the adults will come in later and chastise us for it. Instead, if you called it investing in growing your audience, I don't think anyone's ever going to fault you on that. And that should be the goal of brand. If brand doesn't feel like it has a tie to helping you drive sales, if it doesn't feel like it has a tie, now that can be driving sales in the medium to longer term, but it doesn't have some sense of effectiveness, you're doing it wrong. And I think blowing up that sense of sales versus brand is going to be the first thing that's really going to help a company of any size, but especially a startup, because at a certain point, you're going to hit diminishing returns on that kind of warmer audience or the audience that pushed you into the market. And you're going to need the investment that you've laid for long-term growth.
Jenna, how about from your perspective? How do you balance the need for short-term growth and customer acquisition with long-term brand building, specifically in the early stages of a startup?
Yeah, I feel like this one's like kind of tough because like oftentimes, like early stage startups, it'll just be like, some guy or woman who's responsible or like they're like, responsible for growth overall, and that they have to both be like, marketing lead and the person like tactically like setting up campaigns. And the reality is like literally when it comes to go traffic and execute like your ad campaigns, like in media buying platforms, it is a very dichotomous thing. You literally have to choose objectives that are like sales or at the, ostensibly at the exclusion of other things. And so I think, it's like very easy to get sucked into this, like, well, like I have to go do direct response campaigns because that's literally like the objectives and the measurement that we set for those types of things. And it's a little bit more about like, the recognition that, okay, fine, right? That is the choice that you have to go make when you are setting your media live, or again, like when you're choosing your influencers and like the post copy that you're writing is like specific referrals and like you're doing lots of things again that are very sales oriented. It's still, the investment in brand at that stage is still like, you need to make sure that you have like coherent or cohesive like messaging across like platforms, right? That you're like brand is not strictly like literally just setting up or trafficking like a Facebook like, you know, like campaign or like video views or a couple other things or things that aren't doing this. Your brand work is still the collection of work that you have to do, in refining your messaging, like, you know, your color scheme, like your kids look and feel, like all these other types of things in order to create behavioral feedback loops that you're going to care about later. So I think it's more just like, like stop talking about it. Even though, again, you do, when it comes to being an early stage like startup that has to go do growth activities, even if you are ostensibly labeling those things as like direct response or whatever in the platforms, it is not to get sucked into that, like, you know, that this is a dichotomous like distinction kind of thing, to Dubose's point. Like, I understand it tactically, but it's just not, that's not how the world works. We used to say, when I used to work with Twitter's Tom Roach, also if we see McCann this year, I'm going to tell him that this is how we refer to him exclusively. We used to say, everything brands, everything sells. Like, it's the same. Like, it's your logo. Your logo is the same if it's in a video on a billboard as it is in your retargeting campaigns, right? Like, that's a very simplistic answer, but everything brands, everything sells.
It's one of your tattoos, isn't it? Everything brands, everything sells.
That's gross. And the insinuation that I would get a marketing tattoo is a really big blow for our friendship.
I think, to Jenna, to your point, I think there's one thing that's probably worth really importantly pointing out here is you're building brand and setting brand even when it feels like you're not as an early stage startup. The most effective way to drive sales is probably not going to be the most effective way to drive brand. Now, that feels like, while I'll always do the most effective thing to drive sales as an early stage startup, but hey fucker, pay attention to this ad or the puppy dies is probably going to hurt your brand and would be really effective at driving short-term attention as a piece of copy. So naturally, you are already making decisions to preserve elements of your brand from the moment that you decide not to do things like that. And I think there are inherently going to be borders and kind of barriers to these things to make a longer term investment in a company that you inherently make, even if it doesn't feel like you're doing it. So you're building brand in everything you do. And I think, that should be acknowledged.
All right. So we're going to have a bit of a shorter episode today because unfortunately I have a hard stop and we kicked off a little bit late, but I do want to make sure that we get to the rants and raves. So Joe, just to give you the heads up, this is the part of the episode right at the end where we each share a short rant or rave about something we love or something we hate going on in the marketing world right now. I'll give you a minute to think about it and I will start with Dubose.
Man, I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. Gosh, things going on in the marketing world that I'm excited about right now. I just saw this right before we recorded this, so it's something that's happening very slow moving, but I think we've already talked about Olipop as a brand, but I'm really excited about what they're doing and how they've started to build brand a bit more. For anyone who hasn't come across them, it's probiotic soft drinks that are being sold in all the places that sell you health. I think Whole Foods and Sweet Green being the arch cathedrals of these things. But there's some very good case studies out there about how they grew their business on the T word, TikTok, and also how they're starting to hit the gas on expansion beyond kind of just the Yoga Bunny kind of fitness centers and starting to grow appeal there. And I think it's a really exciting brand and something that I'm intrigued to see where they go from here. So I will rave about them and think it's something, if you haven't heard the story of their growth, it's well worth checking out as a marketer.
We covered them in one of our ZAG editions a while back, actually, so maybe we can dig that out. Go ahead, Jenna.
I memorized every ZAG edition we did. It was great. Yeah. I print them out and stack them like I hoard newspapers.
Because I know it's a long trip from Greenpoint to where the rich people hang out, but if you go to Park Slope, every bodega in Park Slope has Olipop. The rich people bodegas in New York are carrying it. It's not just Whole Foods. Rich people bodegas too.
For our 2 listeners in Greenpoint, someone please tell me, am I in an area that has rich bodegas or not? Because the estate agent promised me I was. So
Williamsburg will. You might have to go down to Williamsburg, but I definitely know like Park Slope does. Yeah. I can go.
Jenna,
I got one.
Rant or rave?
I got a rave. I got a positive one this week. And I will admit I only know about these guys because Jack White is a part investor. The brand is called Warstick. I really like these guys. Actually, also Eric, you like this too. They do pickleball, but also primarily they do like baseball, like bats and like gear, really, really high quality, like athletic equipment and a couple other things. They also do like say pickleball paddles or whatever. I really like them. I've been following them for a really long time, and they actually just did. They just had a product release of it's a baseball bat, but it's hot pink. It also happens to be the rival pink, and it's a very expensive bat. And I think maybe we should buy it just for having recreational softball and baseball purposes. But it's been really interesting to see the development of their brand, and that they've actually now expanded not only just softball coverage, but also women who play baseball specifically. I think that they're doing a really good job of very inclusive sports marketing and being very true to their brand, which is very aggressive. They're called War Stick, and it's about battle and people who want to battle, but still being really inclusive, right? Men and women, a bunch of different sports, kind of deal. War Stick Rave. And I'll send you the hot pink bat that I think we should definitely expense, and then also start a softball league.
I'm into anything hot pink, and that sounds like a totally legitimate marketing expense. Somebody told me that you're always building brand, so I feel like that's what we should do. Joe, what about you? What do you have to rant or rave about this week?
I'm not sure what category it fits into, but a couple of weekends ago, the Marketing Meetups TikTok, we had a video go sort of semi-viral, so 1.8 million views, 180,000 likes or something in that category. The interesting thing was it was a marketing video where the person was discussing how different sounds sound fast or slow. So the sound of a lemon sounds fast, and a mushroom would sound slow. And it was a fascinating talk, but the interesting thing that came off the back of it was in the comments section, there was a couple of things that happen when you go viral. You get the initial burst of excitement, and then you get a long tail of people who are far further from the point that you're trying to make. And a couple of those comments were like, I hate marketers. Single-handedly, you have ruined the American psyche. Comments to that effect, and there were quite a few. And the interesting thing, I'm a quiet sort of introspective person rather than sort of anything else, and it led me down the question: is marketing evil? Is that what we're doing to this world? And fundamentally, I came to this place, which is fundamentally marketing is a tool, and it's our responsibility as marketers to wield the tool that we have, which has the ability to create yes, profit, but also movements responsibly. And so with that thought in mind, really it's a point of thoughtfulness, I guess, which is not to say that one shouldn't engage in marketing, which is less than ethical, that's your choice, but just to choose to do it with intention or not. And so that's my rant or rave, is choose what you want to do, but do it with intention. It's not for me to judge either way.
I think I speak for marketers everywhere when I said the American psyche was already broken when we met it. That's definitely one where you walked in and someone had already smashed up the shop. So
I'm not going either way on that.
That's a great place to leave it. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to connect with you, find out more, or potentially join the Marketing Meetup, where should they go?
Sure, you can head to themarketingmeetup.com or find me on LinkedIn. I spend way too much time there.
Amazing. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good week.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.